Okay, hello. This is our lecture for Unit 3, and our focus is narrative devices. How do fiction writers, and even some nonfiction writers, use different devices to make their writing more interesting? Narrative devices. Okay, as we go through this, you're taking notes, and you are annotating your copy of the text. Narrative devices. What conflicts will drive the plot? Who will the characters be? Against what backdrop will the story develop? These are some of the questions a writer considers when crafting a story. Beyond these considerations, a writer must make two other critical choices: who tells the story, and how the events will unfold in time. As a reader, you should be aware of how these choices affect your perceptions of the characters and your understanding of events. Part 1. Choices about the narrator. Point of view. We also call it POV. Point of view. Point of view refers to the vantage point from which a story is told. Point of view is created by the writer's choice of narrator, the voice that tells the story. This choice affects This choice affects whether the narrator is a character in the story or an outside observer. It also influences your opinion of the characters and how much you learn about them. So let me explain a couple of those terms. Vantage point. Okay, this is a term used in art also. So let's say this is the city street and these are the buildings. Okay, your vantage point, right, is you're here and you can look this way. Well, how would the story be different if your vantage point were over here? Or how would the story be different if your vantage point was up on the very top of a building looking down? Vantage point refers to your position from which you see everything. How you see everything is your vantage point. Okay? What was the other one? Okay, so the choice of narrator, the voice that tells the story, affects your opinion of the character, whether you hear the character's own opinions or if you're hearing about them from an outside voice. There's a way that we say it, fly on the wall. Okay, so if there's the wall. Let's say you got a little fly. Wow, my font is too big. Okay, so here are the people and they're talking to each other. Hi, how are you? Da, da, da. And this little fly hears everything. Okay, that's a choice the narrator could make. The fly on the wall choice. Okay, that's our third person narrator that we're going to learn about. Fly on the wall. So the fly on the wall hears everything and sees everything in that room. The fly on the wall doesn't know what's in the hearts of the people, though. The fly on the wall does not know that. Only what they say and do. But what if the narrator wasn't a fly on the wall, but was this person right here? This person's narrating about everything else. Now we're talking about a character in the story. So that's a different vantage point. The person's in the story. And we'll be reviewing these terms on Quizlet as well. So point of view. There's a great chart here. We'll make sure we have this in our notebooks. points of view and what are your strategies to analyze point of view. So the first person point of view. The narrator is a main or a minor character in the story. So the narrator is a character in the story. Okay? The narrator refers to himself or herself as I, me. You'll hear I, me, my, ours, us, we. The narrator presents his or her own thoughts, own feelings, and their own understanding or interpretations about what's going on. And the narrator lacks direct access to the thoughts of other characters. Okay, so the narrator doesn't know what's in the other characters' heads. Okay? That's first person. And strategies. Consider the source. You may feel connected to the first person narrator because he or she seems to be talking directly to you. However, don't always trust everything the narrator tells you. You have to ask yourself, is the narrator trustworthy? Or are they unreliable? Because the person is a character in the story, they could be telling the story from their point of view, and their point of view could be untrue. Okay, or they could be intentionally lying. It's possible. How might the narrator's opinions of other characters affect what he or she says about them? Okay, so they might be very biased. So that is first person, I, me, my, character in the story. But you got to watch out with first person narrator because you can't necessarily trust everything they tell you. Okay, so third person, limited, and then third person, omniscient. This should sound familiar to you if you've been studying English in the United States for several years. These have been standards in 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Third person, limited. The narrator is not a character, okay, in the story. The narrator is outside of the story, an outside observer, like a fly on the wall. The narrator zooms in on the thoughts and feelings of one character, usually the protagonist. So that fly on the wall in third person limited could have some information about the feelings and the thoughts of the main character, usually. Only one character, not all of the characters. Okay? So some strategies. Understand the limitations of this point of view. Because you only learn one character's thoughts, you don't get the big picture. You don't get the complete picture. So you should ask yourself, how might the character's thoughts affect the reader's mind, my impressions of characters and events? And what would a more omniscient narrator be able to tell me or convey? Convey means to give, to show, to carry across. Okay, so what would a more omniscient narrator be able to tell me? If you don't know the word omniscient, we're going to learn that now. Omniscient. Good word to know. Omni means all. Okay, and this refers to the mind. Just notice the root is the same as the word, I know you're thinking science, but that's not what I mean. The word conscience, conscientious, having to do with your mind. Okay, so all-knowing is what we say omniscient means, all-knowing. Knows everything. Okay, so the narrator in a third-person omniscient story, they're not a character. They're an outside observer, like a fly on the wall. But they are the all-knowing fly. Okay, they're like the Spider-Man type of fly. They get superpowers. They know everything. So he or she has access to the thoughts and the feelings of all the characters. Okay? So a strategy when you're reading from a third-person omniscient point of view is take advantage of the insights. When an omniscient narrator tells the story, you too become all-knowing. You become the great and powerful Oz. And you can ask, how do the different characters react to the same event? How do the characters perceive each other? Okay, and that is our focus for this unit, one of them. First person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. 3 different points of view. Now that we have the background, okay, we're going to do some practice. Model 1. In this excerpt, the narrator learns that her sister Lala has broken off her wedding engagement. And broken off means that she's ended it. So no more wedding engagement. How does the narrator react to this news? Okay, so let's read. It was a call from London, and it was Alan Sutton. I have to speak to Lala. His voice sounded frantic. I said cautiously, is anything wrong? She's broken off our engagement. I got back from the office and found a letter from her and my ring. She said she was coming home. She doesn't want to get married. I found myself caught up in a tangle of conflicting emotions. Enormous sympathy for Alan, a reluctant admiration for Lala, who had the courage to take this shattering decision, but as well a sort of rising excitement. Okay. Looking at the questions. So review the boxed text. What do you learn about the narrator's feelings? Well, first of all, you see that this is first person point of view, right? How do you know? Because you see the I. And is this person a character in the story? Yes. So we've got I, they are a character, first person. Now let's look at the boxed text here. Read it again. So what feelings does she have? Sympathy, admiration, and a little excitement. How would this scene be different if Alan were the narrator? So Alan, the man who just had his fiancée break up with him, if he were telling the story, it would be quite different, right? We would hear more about his feelings, his thoughts, what's going on in his heart, which is broken, right? Okay. Make sure you've written your answers down. Let's move on. And annotate it. How do we know it's first person? I. And third person point of view. Here a visitor prompts Louis and his father, Mr. Citron, to reflect on the past. Notice how the omniscient narrator lets you in on the character's thoughts. And lets you in means that you're able to see inside the character's mind. Lets you in. From Catch the Moon. Please call me Naomi, Senor Citron. You know my mother. She's the director of the funeral home. Mr. Citron seemed surprised at first. He prided himself on having a great memory. Then his friendly expression changed to one of sadness as he recalled the day of his wife's burial. Naomi did not finish her sentence. She reached over and placed her hand on Mr. Citron's arm for a moment. Then she said, "Adios," softly, and got in her shiny white car. She waved to them as she left, and her gold bracelets flashing in the sun nearly blinded Louis. Mr. Citron shook his head. "How about that?" he said, as if to himself. "They are the Dominican owners of the Ramirez Funeral Home." And with a sigh, "She seems like such a nice young woman. Reminds me of your mother when she was her age." Hearing the funeral parlor's name, Luis remembered too, the day his mother died. He had been in her room at the hospital while his father had gone for coffee. The alarm had gone off on her monitor, and nurses had come running in, pushing him aside. After that, all he recalled was the anger that had made him punch a hole in his bedroom wall. Okay, so find one example in which the narrator reveals Mr. Citron's thoughts. Then find one example in which Luis's thoughts are described. Okay. So here we have he prided himself on having a great memory. He recalled the day of his wife's burial. Okay, those are his thoughts, Mr. Citron. And then we hear Luis's thoughts. He's remembering this day also. And he remembers how he put a hole in the wall. So in a very short passage, we get inside the mind of two characters. This is third person omniscient. The narrator is not part of the story. They're an outsider. Describe Luis's and Mr. Citron's feelings about their loss. What emotions is each character dealing with? So looking at it again, we have sadness, and then what do we have here? What do we have here? What feeling do you see? Anger, right? He punched a hole in the wall. Okay, now we're looking at part 2, choices about time. Okay, and the word you want to know there is chronology, chronological order. So in addition to making choices about point of view, writers make choices about how time is going to unfold in a story. Most writers choose to tell a story in chronological order. Sometimes, though, a writer will use techniques such as flashback or foreshadowing to create specific events, specific effects. We also have flash forward. So flashback, flash forward, and foreshadowing are 3 terms that you will see on Quizlet when you prepare and study the vocabulary for this unit. If you've ever watched a horror movie, you know about foreshadowing, or the use of hints to build suspense about what will happen next. Those hints may be shots of foreboding settings, foreboding meaning scary, or statements like, "I'll be right back." Okay, so when a character in a scary movie says, "I'll be right back," you're thinking, no, you won't. Something's going to happen to you. So those are sure signs of lurking danger, right? That there's danger right around the corner. It's lurking. Writers use foreshadowing to create edge-of-your-seat effects, to create suspense. Okay, so suspense, so that you're on the edge of your seat, wondering what's going to happen next. As you read any story, look for similar hints, repeated details, or characters who make important statements or behave in unusual ways. Did you guys see that list? Some things to look for. Repeated details. characters make important statements where they say something, or something that they do that's unusual or weird. So what clues in this familiar movie scenario hint at a disastrous plane crash? So if you look at the pictures, so we see flashes of lightning, signal an approaching storm. That's foreshadowing, right? A passenger reassures others, there's nothing to worry about. Like, don't say that. You're jinxing us, right? So it's foreshadowing. The pilot loses control of the aircraft. Something happens in the cockpit, and you know what's going to happen at the end. The aircraft crashes on a remote island. So all of this is foreshadowing this event. Little clues that if you're paying attention, you're thinking, I know what's going to happen. Foreshadowing. Now, another device is flashback, used very frequently in movies and definitely very frequently in books, short stories, comic books. A flashback is another device frequently used in movies. In literature, a flashback is an account of an event or conversation that happened before, the beginning of the story. It interrupts the chronological order of events to reveal information that can help the readers understand the characters or the current situation. So it's always there to help make sense of what's happening. To spot, to see a flashback, look for phrases that signal a shift in time, such as, he remembered the day, or as a young child, something that shows you that they're going back in time. So how does this flashback help you understand the character's emotions? So remnants of the crash remain on the beach. One survivor's thoughts turn toward home. He remembers time spent with his family years earlier. Jolted to the present, he realizes he may never see his family again. And here's a flashback. And what does it do for us? As the reader, it gets us emotionally invested or connected to the character. Suddenly, we care. We're thinking, oh, how sad, right? He's going to never see his little girl again. Oh, right? It gets us emotionally invested. And now we care. And flashbacks always serve a purpose. Okay? So here's a model of flashback. So sophistication is a story about a young man and a woman who want to look sophisticated, right, fancy, in each other's eyes. Here the characters reflect on an awkward encounter from their past. Awkward, like embarrassing. So consider how the flashback helps you understand the characters and their current situation. When the moment of sophistication came to George Willard, his mind turned to Helen White, the Weinsberg banker's daughter. Once on a summer night when he was 18, he had walked with her on a country road and in her presence had given way to an impulse to boast, to make himself appear big and significant in her eyes. Now he wanted to see her for another purpose. He wanted to try to make her feel the change he believed had taken place in his nature. Helen White was thinking of George Willard, even as he wandered gloomily through the crowds thinking of her. She remembered this summer evening when they had walked together and wanted to talk with him again. Wanted to walk with him again. She thought that the months she had spent in the city, the going to theaters, the seeing of great crowds wandering in lighted thoroughfares, had changed her profoundly. She wanted him to feel and be conscious of the change in her nature. The summer evening together that had left its mark on the memory of both the young man and woman had, when looked at quite sensibly, been rather stupidly spent. They had walked out of town along a country road. Then they had stopped by a fence near a field of young corn, and George had taken off his coat and let it hang on his arm. "Well, I've stayed here in Winesburg. Yes, I've not gone away yet. I've not yet gone away, but I'm growing up," he had said. "I've been reading books and I've been thinking. I'm going to try to amount to something in life." "Well," he explained, "that isn't the point. Perhaps I'd better quit talking." The confused boy put his hand on the girl's arm. His lip trembled. The two started to walk back along the road toward town. In his desperation, George boasted, "I'm going to be a big man, the biggest that ever lived here in the Winesburg," he declared. The boy's voice failed, and in silence the two came back into town and went along the street to Helen White's house. At the gate he tried to say something impressive. Speeches he had thought out came into his head, but they seemed utterly pointless. On the warm fall evening, as he stood in the stairway and looked at the crowd drifting through Main Street, George thought of the talk beside the field of young corn and was ashamed of the figure he had made of himself. So what do we learn about George's insights, his thoughts, in lines 1 to 7? So here are lines 1 to 7. What is he thinking? So he's thinking of this girl. He's remembering, did you guys see the flashback? When he was 18, there's our flashback. And he's remembering when he had been bragging and boasting about how he was going to be a big man. And now he wanted to make her feel the change he believed had taken place, that he is no longer someone who brags. What did you learn about Helen's thoughts? What is she thinking? That she'd been to the city, she'd gone to theater, she'd seen crowds of people in fancy places, and she had been changed. And she wanted him to feel and be conscious of the change in her nature, that she's become more sophisticated. Right? That she's become more sophisticated. So later, a flashback takes you to the summer evening that has loomed in George's and Helen's memories. Where does this flashback begin? Okay. And then I would actually say this is where it really seems like a true flashback, because we're back in time from here on. Here he's thinking of it, he's remembering it, but I would say here is when he truly is, and they both truly are, flashing back. So the chronology is present, remembering the past, right? And now going back to the past, flashback. Review the box details. What do they reveal about George's behavior? Explain whether you think he impressed Helen. And how does this flashback help you understand George? Consider how he thinks he has changed since that evening. So, the box details reveal that George boasted because he was desperate to impress Helen. And perhaps you're going to think he may not have done a very good job impressing Helen. And the flashback helps readers understand that George himself was embarrassed by his own behavior, even at that time. Readers can see how ridiculously George behaved and why he wants so badly to redeem himself in Helen's eyes. When he first met Helen, he wanted her to think he was significant, he was important, he was somebody. Now he wants to show her that he's matured since then. Okay, be sure you have written answers to these questions and you have annotated the text before you move on.